The year is 793. The salty wind howls off the North Sea. On the horizon, dark shapes emerge from the morning mist. Longships, their dragon-headed prows cutting the waves like knives. The monks of Lindisfarne, wrapped in prayer, look up too late. The Vikings have arrived, and the age of peace is over. With Northumbria and East Anglia lost, the Viking tide rolled westward. Their next target, Mercia, once the mightiest of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. By 874, the great heathen army had advanced deep into Mercian lands. Towns were pillaged, churches burned, and royal defences shattered. King Burgred, once proud and defiant, found himself helpless against the Norse juggernaut. In desperation, he turned to Wessex for aid, but Wessex was now guarding its own borders. With little support, Burgred fled into exile, abandoning his throne and kingdom. The Vikings installed a puppet king, Ceolwulf, a Mercian noble who ruled in name but answered to Norse warlords. Mercia too had fallen, at least in the eyes of the people. The heart of Anglo-Saxon power was now split and bleeding. But something remarkable happened next. Instead of continuing west, the Viking army divided. Halfdan Ragnarsson led one group north to consolidate power in Northumbria. Others settled in the fertile lands of the Midlands, farming the very soil they had once scorched. While Edward ruled from Wessex, the flame of resistance in Mercia burned bright under an unexpected leader. Ethelfled, Alfred's daughter. After her husband, Lord Ethelred of Mercia, fell ill and eventually died, Ethelfled did the unthinkable. She ruled as a woman in her own right, a rarity in medieval Europe. But she was no mere figurehead. Her courage, wisdom, and tactical mind earned her the loyalty of warriors and nobles alike. Known as the Lady of the Mercians, Ethelfled launched a bold campaign to reclaim territory from the Danes. Like her father and brother, she expanded the network of burhs, fortified towns across Mercia, and transformed them into launching points for offensive strikes. In 917, she led the capture of Derby, one of the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw. It was a bloody victory, but a vital one. Soon after, she took Leicester without resistance. Even the Norse lords began to fear her name. Ethelfled combined the fierce heart of a warrior with the sharp mind of a diplomat. She forged alliances with Welsh kings and coordinated closely with Edward, creating a united Anglo-Saxon front. Under her leadership, Mercia rose again, not as a rival to Wessex, but as its equal in the fight for England's soul. In 924, shortly after the submission of York, Edward the Elder died unexpectedly while putting down a revolt in Mercia. His death marked the end of a relentless reign that had nearly fulfilled his father Alfred's vision, a united land from the Channel to the Humber, defended by burhs, ruled by law, and poised for greatness. Edward had not been the visionary that Alfred was, but he was the builder, the tireless craftsman of unity. Through campaigns, diplomacy, and sheer determination, he had extended Wessex's authority into Mercia, East Anglia, and beyond. He secured peace with the Welsh and received tribute from Scots, and in York, even the Danes had knelt to his crown. But Edward's passing brought uncertainty. Would his heirs hold together the fragile unity he forged? Would York remain loyal? Would Viking power rise again from the shadows? His son, Aethelstan, would inherit more than a crown. He would inherit a land half won and a legacy half built. The dream of a single English kingdom teetered on the edge. Edward died not as a regional king, but as a king of many peoples. His kingdom was not yet England, but it was close. When Aethelstan rose to the throne in 924, many questioned his claim. Though Edward's son, he was raised in Mercia, far from the court at Winchester, and his right to rule was challenged by rivals in Wessex. But Aethelstan proved himself swiftly. By 927, he did what no king before him had accomplished. He brought all of England under one crown. He marched north and took York, not by fire, but by forceful diplomacy. King Constantine of Scotland and the Norse lords of Strathclyde met him at Amont Bridge and submitted, at least for a time. Aethelstan now ruled from the Channel to the Firth of Forth. He declared himself King of the English, a title never before used. His reign was marked by strong laws, coinage reforms, and the forging of powerful alliances across Europe. He welcomed scholars and relics from distant lands. England, for the first time, was seen as a united Christian realm in the eyes of Christendom. But peace would not last. Enemies resented his power, and soon a coalition of Scots, Danes, and Britons would test the strength of this newly united kingdom. Yet for now, Aethelstan stood as the first true king of England. While Alfred strengthened Wessex, the Danelaw was reshaping eastern England under Norse rule. But these Viking conquerors did not simply plunder and vanish. They stayed and began to govern. Scandinavian earls and jarls took over lands once held by Anglo-Saxon nobles. They ruled from strongholds in places like York, Lincoln, and Thetford. The old Saxon laws gave way to Danish customs, where fines replaced vengeance and trials were judged by local assemblies. The Thing. Farms multiplied, trade flourished, and Norse culture fused with the land. Old English mingled with Old Norse, giving rise to place names like Grimsby, Derby, and Scunthorpe. Even daily speech in these regions began to carry Viking echoes. Yet the transition was not entirely smooth. Beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Christian Anglo-Saxons still resisted pagan practices. Some Norse settlers converted to Christianity, while others clung to Odin and Thor. The fusion was uneasy, a land caught between two worlds. The Danelaw was no longer a battlefield. It was a society in flux, where axes hung beside plows and pagan tattoos were inked on Christian skin. And though Alfred respected the peace, he watched carefully. The Danelaw was growing roots, but it was not yet permanent. In the spring of 878, Alfred emerged from the marshes, no longer a fugitive, but a war leader with purpose. His forces, though smaller than Guthrum's Viking army, were united and determined. They met near Edington, on the edge of Salisbury Plain. Alfred chose his ground wisely, narrow, defendable terrain that neutralized the Viking advantage. His men stood in a shield wall, shoulder to shoulder, their spears steady, their king at their head. The clash was brutal. Steel rang against steel, spears shattered, blood soaked the earth. But Alfred's strategy held. He had trained his men to fight as one, disciplined, patient, and fierce. The Vikings, used to fast, overwhelming charges, were ground down. By day's end, Guthrum's army broke. The survivors fled to Chippenham, their stronghold. Alfred surrounded them, cutting off supplies. After 2 weeks of siege, the Norse surrendered. But Alfred did not demand death, he demanded transformation. Guthrum agreed to be baptized a Christian. He took the name Ethelstan and swore peace. It was a turning point. The Vikings were not invincible. England could fight back and win. Alfred had done more than save Wessex. This brutal raid, swift and merciless, marks the beginning of a storm that will rage across England for centuries. These are not just pirates, they are farmers, warriors, and kings in waiting. From the fjords of Norway and the forests of Denmark, they come hungry, not only for treasure, but for land, glory, and destiny. But England is not unguarded. The Anglo-Saxons, descendants of earlier invaders, hold their own kingdoms: Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex. They are Christian kings, warrior lords, and proud nobles fiercely defending their land and faith. What follows is a clash of two worlds: pagan steel against Christian resolve. Mead halls turned to battlegrounds, treaties written in blood, and from this chaos, a new England will rise. This is not just a tale of conquest, it's a saga of resistance, betrayal, and transformation. In 865, the Viking threat changed form. No longer mere raiders, a vast coalition of warriors crossed the North Sea, an army, not of dozens, but thousands. It would become known as the Great Heathen Army. Led by legendary Norse chieftains Halfdan Ragnarsson, Ivar the Boneless, and Ubba, this force was driven by vengeance and ambition. According to sagas, they came to avenge their father, Ragnar Lothbrok, executed by King Ella of Northumbria. Whether myth or truth, their arrival changed everything. This was no smash-and-grab raid. The Great Army came to conquer. They landed in East Anglia, where the local king, Edmund, offered horses in exchange for peace. With new mounts and little resistance, the Vikings turned north. In 866, they took York, one of the most important cities in England. Northumbria crumbled. King Ella was captured and, some say, executed by the Blood Eagle, a gruesome Viking ritual. For the first time, Anglo-Saxon rulers realized the scale of what they faced. This was not just about plunder. The Norse sought to carve out kingdoms, to rule. In 878, Wessex came to the edge of ruin. A sudden Viking assault during the winter caught King Alfred unprepared. Guthrum, the Danish warlord, launched a surprise attack during the sacred festival of Epiphany. Alfred barely escaped with his life. His court was scattered, his army disbanded. Driven into the marshes of Somerset, Alfred hid in the fens of Athelney, a cold, wet wilderness where few dared follow. For months, he lived like an outlaw, moving quietly among the reeds with only a small band of loyal followers. Legends say he took refuge in a peasant's cottage and, lost in thought, once let a woman's cakes burn on the fire. But while the bread scorched, so too did Alfred's resolve harden. From these swamps, he planned his return, not as a defeated king, but as a leader reborn. He sent word in secret, calling his thanes to rally. Across Wessex, men began to gather, farmers, soldiers, nobles, answering the call of a king who refused to vanish. The Norse thought Alfred broken, but he was about to strike back with a fury that would echo across generations. After Edington, Alfred knew that peace alone could not protect Wessex. The Vikings would return, stronger, bolder, and more ruthless, so he turned to strategy, not swords. Alfred's solution was revolutionary: the burh system. Across southern England, he ordered the construction and restoration of fortified towns, burhs, designed to serve as centers of defense, trade, and governance. These were not simple wooden forts. They were stone-reinforced strongholds with garrisons, supplies, and refuge for local populations. Each burh was carefully placed within a day's march of another, forming a defensive web across the kingdom. No Viking raiding party could strike deep without facing organized resistance from one or more burhs. But Alfred's reforms didn't stop at walls. He reorganized the Fyrd, the local militia, ensuring that half of Wessex's warriors were always ready for battle, while the other half tended fields. It was a balance of war and survival. He also established a navy, small at first, but growing, designed to intercept Viking ships before they ever reached shore. Alfred wasn't just defending a kingdom, he was reinventing it. By the late 880s, Alfred was aging. His body, worn by illness and war, slowed, but his mind remained sharp. He had defended Wessex, negotiated peace with Guthrum, and sparked a cultural revival. But he knew one truth above all: peace was fragile. It could vanish with his death. So Alfred turned to succession. His son, Edward, had grown up in a kingdom constantly at war. Trained in arms and letters, Edward was no mere prince. He was a symbol of continuity. Alfred ensured he would inherit not just a crown, but a legacy. He began including Edward in matters of state, battle planning, and diplomacy. But succession in Anglo-Saxon England was never guaranteed. Powerful nobles could reject an heir, and rival claimants could emerge. To secure Edward's future, Alfred sought unity with the neighboring kingdoms still outside Norse control. He formed an alliance with Ethelred of Mercia, who ruled the western part of the kingdom not under Viking control. Ethelred married Alfred's daughter, Ethelfled, binding Wessex and Mercia together in blood and ambition. Through careful planning, Alfred wasn't just passing the torch, he was laying the foundation for a united England. With Alfred's death, Edward the Elder ascended the throne, crowned not in peace, but under the shadow of renewed Viking ambition. The Danelaw remained powerful, and new Norse warlords eyed the borders of Wessex with hungry ambition. Edward, though untested, acted swiftly. He first secured loyalty at home, suppressing a rebellion led by his cousin, Ethelwald, who sought to claim the throne. Ethelwald fled to Northumbria and stirred up Viking support, igniting a new war between Saxon and Dane. In 901, the conflict exploded. The Danes allied with Ethelwald and invaded Wessex and Mercia, but Edward, building on his father's military reforms, raised the Fyrd and struck back with discipline and speed. At the Battle of the Holm in 902, the Saxons suffered heavy losses, but Ethelwald was slain, a major blow to Viking hopes of disrupting Edward's rule. Though the battle ended inconclusively, it removed the strongest rival to the crown. Edward then focused on rebuilding alliances with Mercia and reinforcing the burhs. Like his father, he recognized that war was not only won by swords, but by planning, patience, and unity. With the pretender dead and the throne secure, Edward now prepared to do what even Alfred had not fully achieved: reclaim Danelaw. In the year 899, England lost its defender. After decades of war, reform, and unrelenting labor, King Alfred the Great passed away in his early 50s. His death was not marked by battle, but by a quiet end surrounded by kin and clergy. Yet the impact shook the land. A king who had once fled into swamps had risen to become a savior and a scholar, one who fought with both blade and book. Wessex mourned deeply. Monks recorded his passing in reverent tones. His burial at Winchester, his capital, became a site of pilgrimage. Even in death, Alfred inspired devotion. But there was little time for grief. The throne now passed to Edward, his son, soon to be known as Edward the Elder. Unlike his father, Edward had not yet proved himself. The Viking threat still loomed. Danelaw was strong, and rival Saxon factions could challenge his rule. The transition of power would test everything Alfred had built. His alliances, reforms, and vision all rested on whether Edward could hold the realm together. The king was dead, but the dream of a united England was very much alive. The next chapter of resistance had begun. In the year 899, England lost its defender. After decades of war, reform, and unrelenting labor, King Alfred the Great passed away in his early 50s. His death was not marked by battle, but by a quiet end surrounded by kin and clergy. Yet the impact shook the land. A king who had once fled into swamps had risen to become a savior and a scholar, one who fought with both blade and book. Wessex mourned deeply. Monks recorded his passing in reverent tones. His burial at Winchester, his capital, became a site of pilgrimage. Even in death, Alfred inspired devotion. But there was little time for grief. The throne now passed to Edward, his son, soon to be known as Edward the Elder. Unlike his father, Edward had not yet proved himself. The Viking threat still loomed. Danelaw was strong, and rival Saxon factions could challenge his rule. The transition of power would test everything Alfred had built. His alliances, reforms, and vision all rested on whether Edward could hold the realm together. The king was dead, but the dream of a united England was very much alive. The next chapter of resistance had begun. In 937, the fragile unity of England faced its greatest test. A vast alliance formed against King Athelstan, Constantine of Scotland, Olaf Guthfrithson, a Norse king from Dublin, and the Britons of Strathclyde. They marched into the heart of England, determined to shatter the young kingdom and restore Viking and Celtic power in the north. Athelstan met them near a place called Brunanburh, its exact location lost to history, but its legacy carved in blood. The battle was cataclysmic. Shield walls clashed in waves. Saxon and Norse, Scot and Briton fought from dawn to dusk. The fields were soaked in blood, the dead piled high. Eyewitnesses said eagles and wolves feasted for days. But Athelstan held the field. His disciplined army, hardened by years of conquest and reform, outlasted the invaders. Olaf fled to Ireland. Constantine limped back to Scotland, his son among the slain. Brunanburh was not just a victory, it was a declaration. The Anglo-Saxons had not merely defended their land, they had forged it. From Alfred's marshes to Ethelstan's crown, England had risen from the ashes of war and division. It would face new threats in centuries to come, but from Brunanburh forward, it stood as one. A kingdom born in battle. The attack on Lindisfarne in 793 was more than a raid, it was a symbol. The sacred island, home to monks, manuscripts, and holy relics, was torn apart. The Vikings slaughtered without mercy, their axes indifferent to cries for salvation. Gold was taken, altars shattered, and survivors dragged away in chains. For Christian England, this was unthinkable. A place of worship desecrated. Word of the horror spread like wildfire through the kingdoms. Some saw it as divine punishment, others as a call to arms. But who were these invaders? They came from the cold lands across the sea. Norsemen skilled in shipcraft, forged in hardship, and bound by a code of honor and vengeance. Their longships could sail up rivers, strike inland, and vanish before a response could be mounted. King Ethelred of Northumbria, shaken and humiliated, failed to organize a meaningful defense. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, divided and distrustful, could not unite fast enough. And so, the Vikings came again and again, growing bolder with each strike. Lindisfarne was only the beginning. The North Sea was no longer a border, it had become a highway of war. The age of Viking terror had begun, and England stood trembling in its shadow. By the early 920s, only one major Viking stronghold remained outside Edward's control: York, the jewel of Northumbria. For decades, York had been a Norse capital. Its markets bustled with trade from as far as Byzantium and the Baltic. Viking jarls ruled with a mix of commerce and sword, and the city's defenses were strong. But isolation was setting in. The Danelaw had fractured. Mercia and East Anglia were in Saxon hands. Allies were few. Edward the Elder moved carefully. Instead of launching an immediate assault, he built pressure around the north, fortifying burhs along the Humber and Trent, cutting off York's trade routes, and accepting pledges of loyalty from surrounding peoples, Mercians, Danes, and even Welsh kings. Then, in 924, something extraordinary happened. The Danish lords of York came to Edward not in war, but in submission. They swore allegiance to the king of the Anglo-Saxons, acknowledging his overlordship. For the first time, even the Norse of York bowed to a southern king. It wasn't permanent, nor was it without tension, but it was a powerful moment. Edward stood on the brink of unifying England, not just by conquest, but by consent. And with York in hand, that dream drew closer to reality. After the fall of Northumbria, the great heathen army turned its eyes back to East Anglia. The small kingdom, which had earlier offered tribute, now faced the full wrath of Viking ambition. King Edmund of East Anglia, young and devout, refused to submit. He gathered what forces he could, calling upon God and countrymen to resist. But his army was no match for hardened Norse warriors. In 869, the Vikings swept through the countryside, burning villages and slaughtering resistors. Edmund was captured, offered a choice: renounce his faith and become a puppet king, or die. He chose martyrdom. According to legend, he was bound to a tree, shot with arrows until he resembled a hedgehog, and finally beheaded. His body was later recovered, and miracles were said to occur at his tomb. Saint Edmund would become a symbol of Christian resistance for generations. But with his death, East Anglia fell. The kingdom was absorbed into the Viking-controlled region known as the Danelaw. In 865, the tides of Viking ambition surged like never before. This time, they did not come to raid and flee. They came to conquer. A massive coalition of Norse warriors, known to history as the Great Heathen Army, landed in East Anglia, led by fearsome warlords Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and Ubba, sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. The Anglo-Saxon kings had grown weary of Viking raids, but nothing prepared them for a force this size. Unlike earlier assaults, this was a well-organized invasion. The Vikings demanded tribute and land, and when refused, they took both by force. Northumbria fell quickly. Its capital, York, once a proud Roman city, was seized and renamed Jorvik. King Ella, who had once cast Ragnar into a snake pit, was captured and met a gruesome fate, according to Norse sagas, the brutal Blood Eagle. The Anglo-Saxons, fractured by rivalries and weak leadership, could not present a united front. One by one, their kingdoms buckled under the Viking wave. Even the mighty Mercia began to falter. The great heathen army wasn't just here for plunder, they were here to stay, and soon, the fate of all England would hang in the balance.